Lost the dedications. Chana, I lost the dedication, just lost them.
Okay.
I'm going to read some dedications.
Here, I have it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, there's another one.
Yeah. Oh, there's another.
Yeah, here.
Yeah. Today's shir is sponsored by Rachel Steiner in honor of her new great-grandson, Mazel Tov, Mordechai Yehuda, named for his great-grandfather, Mark Steiner, Zichrono Livracha, that many of us, including myself, considered Mark a very, very dear friend and a brilliant scholar, and may this perpetuate his neshama. In addition, our shir is dedicated anonymously. I am technologically challenged, for the refuah shlema of Oksana Bat Bluma and Evelina Bat Galina. May they have a refuah shlema b'toch shar cholei Yisrael. Okay, so we are continuing the discussion of Igeret Hashmad or Mamar Kiddush Hashem. There are two names here. And at this point, the Rambam actually goes into the pure halachic part of the letter, because obviously the Rambam has to address the issue, when must a Jew give up his life? When must you be willing to die rather than transgress the Torah? Because that's really a central issue here. That this anonymous rabbi, told the Jews that they would have to submit to death rather than profess belief in Islam. And if they did not do so, they are goyim in the eyes of God, and any mitzvot they do are totally rejected. So the Rambam needs, in addition to the musar that we looked at, the tochacha that the Rambam gave to the rabbi, the Rambam now will discuss the actual halachos of martyrdom. And I have to say that this letter was written when the Rambam was, as I say, at the age of 27. Most of it was incorporated in the later Mishnah Torah, but there are some differences between his maskanot in the Mishnah Torah and what he wrote in Mamar Kiddush Hashem in Igeret Hashmad. I'll try to point it out as we come to them. Obviously, we start off with the basic idea that everybody knows, that pikuach nefesh, saving a human life, generally overrides virtually every commandment of the Torah. That is derived actually from a pasuk in last week's parsha, Acharei Mos, the first of the two parshiot, Asher Yaseh Adam Bahem B'chai Bahem, that the Torah was given so that we should live, and Chazal interpret that to mean that V'lo Sheyamutz Bahem, the Torah was not given that we should die, the Torah was given that we should live, ergo, that is the source. Surprisingly enough, I mean, I remember, it's interesting, because it's a little bit of a linguistic stretch that v'chai b'hem is. So I remember when I heard this, I think the first time I heard it, I was in fourth grade, and I said, come on, that can't be, a real drasha. I almost thought it was a joke. But l'maisa, that is the drasha of Chazal, that from v'chai b'hem we learn out the heter, not only the heter, but the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh, docha, Kol HaTorah Kula. Now, the Gemara in Yuma gives another svara, which is really unique to Shabbat, and it says the following: Chalel alav Shabbos achas, kedei sheyishbar Shabbosos harbe. It is better to desecrate one Shabbos to keep somebody alive, in order that they should be able to keep many Shabbosot in the future. Meaning it's more of a pragmatic idea that what are you going to say? I'm not going to desecrate Shabbos so the person will die. If the person will die, he will not be observing the Shabbos in the future. Therefore, it is worthwhile to desecrate one Shabbos in order to facilitate the observance of many Shabbos. Now the emes is, the OUisrael HaKadosh says a very remarkable chiddush, which is not lahalacha. The OUisrael HaKadosh says that if the justification for Chilul Shabbos is the ability to keep more Shabbosos in the future, let's say a person's condition is such where even if you intervene to extend his life, he's not going to make it till next Shabbos, meaning he's going to die now, but if I violate the Shabbos, I can keep him alive for 2 days. So says the Arachayim, there's not going to be any future Shabboses in that situation. Therefore, you would not be allowed to desecrate Shabbos to save his life. But Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky points out, quite properly so, that is absolutely not the halacha. We desecrate Shabbat even to keep a person alive for 1 minute. If a person without intervention is going to die at 10 o'clock, and by intervening and desecrating Shabbat, I can keep him alive till 10:01, the halacha is I do it. Again, I'm not dealing with prolonging suffering, that's another issue, but in the absence of an issue of prolonging suffering, pikuach nefesh is docha. So Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says, obviously this is because the ikar reason is v'chai b'hem. The ikar reason is not chalel alav Shabbat achat. But by the way, this chalel of Shabbat achat comes up in another context as well, nothing to do with pikuach nefesh. This is the perennial question in the Kiruv Rechokim world. Can you invite somebody for a Shabbos meal if you know, right, you offer them a place, but you know they're going to drive? So the problem is you're causing them to do an Aveira. You have a problem of lifnei iver, not putting a stumbling block before a person, not causing them to sin. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, in a very famous tshuva, articulated the rationale that if this is a means or a mechanism, that perhaps he will come to keep the Shabbat, although you don't know, but there's a possibility that this may be a stepping stone by exposing him to Shabbos, that he will be able to keep Shabbatot in the future. So you're allowed to cause a Chilul Shabbat in the short term if there's at least a probability that it will result in Shmirat Shabbat in the long term. Yeah.
There's a distinction because the pikuach nefesh of helping somebody is you're doing the pikuach nefesh, you're doing the aver, whatever it's called, for the other person, whereas in Kiddush Hashem it's the person himself who is committing the whatever, who is doing it in
No, that's true. But that's true. But the truth of the matter is, pikuach nefesh works for yourself too. For example, eating in Yom Kippur is an example, right? If a chola is b'sakana and eats on Yom Kippur, he's doing the aveira.
But even somebody else is allowed.
Even somebody else. In fact, now it is brought down. That if you could save a person's life by the use of a Gentile or a goy, etc., and there would not be a delay. You try to do it through non-Jews if possible, but if there's any element of delay, a Jew should do it. I mean, I remember in my own show when I was a Rav in Silver Spring, so one of the elderly parents, one of our congregants, fainted in the middle of davening. We didn't know what it was, so I went to the phone to call ambulance or 911, and I left the door open, the door to the office open, so specifically people would see I was using the phone, because it's an important point to communicate that for pikuach nefesh there's a chiyuv to violate Shabbos. So I still remember some 10-year-old kid walked by and said, "Hey, the rabbi's using the phone on Shabbos." Whatever. But I guess that was part of the point. Baruch Hashem, it turned out the man was okay. He was just dehydrated. So the question then becomes, well, did I violate Shabbos since there was no sakana? No, obviously not. If you violate Shabbos, or not, I shouldn't even call it violation, because you think it's a pikuach nefesh situation, even if blessedly so, it turns out not to be pikuach nefesh, you did exactly the right thing. Yeah.
So this is a little off topic. If you're traveling and you come across traffic or whatever, are you obligated to leave your car and somehow just walk a couple of miles? Because I was told if you left enough time to get to your destination, you should just continue and go.
Okay. So first of all, it is true that if getting out of the car that's in the middle of a highway would be pikuach nefesh, that would be a heter. But putting aside pikuach nefesh and just focusing on the tircha, so it really depends. If you are being driven, if you're on a bus, if you're on a train, you can just keep going. On the other hand, if you're actively doing the driving, that's an act of chilul Shabbos. If it's not pikuach nefesh, you do have to get out of the car.
The key when you get out of the car. Because if you're carrying, this is like just a very practical thing. What do you do with the,
Yeah, well, the answer is you should hope for the best. You should hide the key somewhere there, and hopefully it'll be there when you do it. I mean, I myself, I think maybe once, Baruch Hashem, it was like a big snowstorm in Silver Spring in Maryland, and I had to get out of the car. Something, it wasn't. It was like three or 4 miles from my house, but it wasn't on a major highway. It was already in town. But yeah, sometimes you got to do it. But if, on the other hand, you're on a train or a bus, even if the bus stops, but it's not where you have to go, you can keep on going till it goes there. Yeah.
It happened once to my husband also. It
Yeah.
was a snowstorm.
Yeah.
And he was coming home, driving home.
Right.
And he got stuck.
Yeah.
He pulled off the highway.
Yeah.
And he pulled into a driveway.
Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah.
And he explained to the person
Yeah.
and asked if it would be all right if he parked his car in the driveway until after the Sabbath.
And they just allowed it.
And
These were non-Jewish people, I think.
non-Jewish.
Non-Jewish, yeah.
Anyway, he walked home, and we didn't know where he was, of course.
So he came home midnight or whatever.
No,
Was it
2 hours.
Yeah. It's yeah. You got to be careful. Yeah.
He's in the car.
Yeah.
Walked, and the first street was the Lord's Way, leading him right to the shul of Harvard, New York. And he was taken in by the rabbi, and he had a wonderful Shabbat. So,
Now, Baruch Hashem, yeah, a lot of times stranded travelers kind of go into the from community, an unknown from community, and Baruch Hashem, they have hospitality. I know myself. There are people who have become religious precisely when they got a sense that no matter where they are in the world, from person will give them hospitality, no matter where it is, even if they never knew you, they never saw you, and that is enormously impressive. That's a Kiddush Hashem that actually moves people sometimes to become religious. Yeah. Yeah, I'll get there. Yeah, my neck is turned. Yeah.
The man was driving Friday going home.
Yeah.
He was speeding because it was late. Policeman stopped him, and he explained that it's close to the Sabbath and he has to get home.
Right.
The policeman said, "You're an Orthodox Jew. It's in New York.
Yeah.
Going to the 5 towns." The policeman said, "Let me see your stripes." So he said, "Afternoon, they're gone already."
They're gone.
Wait a minute. So he said, "Okay, let me see your strings." Luckily, he had 6s, and he let him go.
Yeah. Someone had a question. Yeah.
you're a woman.
Are there any nuances if the person whose life can be saved by Mahalel Shabbat action is a goy?
Okay, so this is very, very interesting. Yeah. The question is, we desecrate Shabbos to save the life of a Jew. So the question becomes, can we desecrate Shabbos to save the life of a non-Jew, right? So this is a very, very difficult area. The bottom line is we do, but the way we get to it is very, very problematical. According to the Mishnah, the heter and the chiyuv to desecrate the Shabbos in order to, I use the word desecrate, actually it's not a desecration, but to do what otherwise would be forbidden on Shabbos in order to save a life only applies to a Jewish life, and there is no heter pikuach nefesh to save a non-Jewish life, which means every few years there's an article in Mariv or Yediot Achronot about, which is almost always a fake story, about a guy had a heart attack in the middle of Bnei Brak and nobody called. Huh? No, no. If you don't, no, I understand. Okay. No, you're right. You're right. But I'm talking about in theory, whatever it would be. So I was going to say the Pope had a heart attack. Well, okay, even with the Pope, you don't know.
Sometimes the Pope said.
Well, yeah, it's true. Well, the first Pope for sure was Jewish. Peter. Okay. Yeah. Actually, I noticed something about just to digress for a second. The new Pope, very nice guy from Chicago, Pope Bob, they call him, because his name is Robert Pope Leo. But in his speeches, he mentions God. He doesn't mention Yashka so much. He talks a lot about God. It's very, very strange. He doesn't mention Yashka so much. He talks God, relationship with God. So some people say, well, maybe he's Jewish. Who knows? But okay. Anyway, but again, I understand if you don't know, of course, you have to err on the side of intervention. But strictly speaking, you don't save the life of a guy. However, here's what the Shulchan Aruch says. If not saving the life of a non-Jew is going to cause enmity and hatred towards the Jewish people, this is called Ava. So in such a situation, not saving the non-Jew is going to result in endangerment to the Jewish people, and therefore, as a practical answer, we do intervene to save the life of a non-Jew. Now, Rav Soloveitchik used to point out that although this is a pragmatic resolution of the issue, many feel it's not necessarily an ethical resolution of the issue, because essentially what you're saying is the non-Jewish life is not important enough to violate Shabbos, but I'm going to do so because it's going to protect Jewish lives. So practically it makes no difference. We're going to call out Salah, we're going to desecrate the Shabbos, but only because of the endangerment of Klal Yisrael, which would mean, for example, if you're on a desert island, right? Let's say Robinson Crusoe is Jewish, and he's with his man Friday, and no one else is ever going to know. And Friday has a heart attack, and Robinson Crusoe would have to desecrate Shabbos, whatever the case would be. Strictly speaking, not. So it is indeed a difficult ethical problem, and both Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, the Shridei Eish, who was a bit of an earlier gadol, they both considered this to be virtually the most difficult ethical halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. But nevertheless, as I say, it is important to know that practically we will violate Shabbos in a hospital setting or whatever to save a non-Jew. By the way, interesting, I'll leave you, again, I'm digressing a little bit, but I'll leave you with one other interesting machlokas rishonim. Let's say you have a chole that is in a state of sakana, and the doctors say he must eat meat. Meat will somehow keep him going. And it's Shabbos, and you have a choice. You can give him cooked treif meat, in which case you won't have to violate the Shabbos, or you would have, if the only kosher meat you would either have to shech, let's say, or the other way around. I mean, let's assume that you already have treif meat, whether it's cooked or not, so you're going to cook it. The kosher meat you're going to have to shech. So even though in both cases you're going to cook, but if I give him kosher meat, I'm going to have to do an extra malacha of shechita for pikuach nefesh. Is it better to shecht a kosher animal on Shabbos, or to feed the chole the treif meat that's already shechted, maybe already cooked even, and the like? So although one would have argued that it's better to give him treif because treif is a lower level prohibition than Shabbos, and if you could help him with a lower level prohibition, better to do that than a higher level prohibition like Shabbos. But halachically, it's not that way. We actually shecht on Shabbos rather than give him treif meat. And there's a whole discussion why. One of the reasons the Ran says is it's a question of quantity of sin versus quality of sin. And that is, qualitatively, the desecration of Shabbos is worse than eating treif. But with treif, every mouthful is a separate sin. Masha'en kain, the slaughtering of the animal, is one avera. Well, our assumption is you're going to cook the treif also. That was my hypothetical, meaning you're going to cook it anyway.
Cook in either case.
You're going to cook in either case. So the question is, the extra thing is going to be the shechita. So under those circumstances, we actually paskin that quantity of sin overrides quality of sin. Therefore, better to do one act of chilul Shabbat, of shechita, than to create multiple averos with every mouthful of the treif. Yeah.
Jewish pita is one process. To get kosher meat, you have to drain the blood.
Yeah.
You have to kosher it, you have to salt it, and everything. So by the time the chef is kosher cow has meat available, it's like Shabbos already.
No, of course. Again, these are hypothetical questions. I mean, obviously, if the delay in preparing the kosher meat is going to be any type of compromise of his health, then of course you go straight to the treif. Our assumption, again, we're making hypothetical assumptions that the time factor wouldn't come in. But yeah, you have a good point. Yeah. Yeah, one sec. Yeah.
When Hasala actually started,
Yeah.
and these questions arose having to deal with a guy, being called out
Right.
to take care of him, and what you do with the ambulance to return it to its.
Yeah.
And he said, you do everything, because it's kolel pikuach nefesh. You have to return it, so that God forbid the next one comes, so you have it. In other words, you can't look at this thing specifically, hypothetically, put it into a broad picture, and it encases many more.
Yeah, that's very true. This is a very, very interesting, complicated area, and that is, let's say Hatzalah, right? There's no question they can certainly go out to save lives. Question is, can they bring the ambulance back? Can they even go home? And the like. And Rav Shlomo Zalman has a very, very famous responsum in which he actually permits even the return trip, not only of the ambulance, which may be needed for other missions, but even of the individual people, on the argument based on a Gemara that if people will not be able to return, they may be at least psychologically a little reluctant to volunteer and to go out. And this is a principle that the Mishnah calls hitiru sofan mipnei techilasan. They permit the end in order to facilitate the beginning. That's a little controversial. Rav Moshe Feinstein was not necessarily absolutely supportive of it, but Rav Shlomo Zalman so paskind, and again, different Hatzalah workers have different practices, but the ambulance itself does have to return, that's for sure. That has to be returned to the main place or wherever they keep it, because it has to be necessary for potential further missions, even though you don't know, but there's a possibility it will be needed again. Okay, so this is our starting point, right? Our starting point is obvious. I'm sorry, the question? Yeah.
A few years ago, I got a call, I got a knock on the door, can I have the keys to the car?
Yeah.
My friend's son was in the army, a truck overturned on him, and I was told after, I gave her the keys, they told me later that pikuach nefesh, because she would be able to help him, she was allowed to go. And this is probably very pertinent to a parent or a relative today who gets a call, what do? So anyway, I gave her the key,
Yeah.
and then they told me I did the right thing.
Yeah, okay, again, these are very individualized cases, what you might call psychological help, meaning someone, God forbid, is in a life endangerment situation. And they're in a hospital, they're being taken care of medically, but if they would see you, you would visit them, that could pick up their spirits. So that's a very, very difficult shaila, whether the psychological dimension of having a parent there or a loved one there does that qualify as pikuach nefesh. Now, I will tell you, as a very common example of this is when a woman goes into labor, and childbirth is considered to be pikuach nefesh, and of course, we violate the Shabbos and the Yom Kippur. We try to get a non-Jewish driver, but if indeed you can't get a non-Jewish driver or it would take too long, the husband or anyone, a Jewish person, drives to the hospital. Although it's kind of a nightmare. Where do you park the car? Where do you stop the car? It's extremely complicated. But in terms of getting her to the hospital, for sure. So the question would be, can an extra person come along, like a husband, if he's not the driver, or the like? And often we say that the accompaniment of that extra person is part of the pikuach nefesh process because it alleviates tension, it calms a person down, and we recognize that that's pikuach nefesh. In fact, it's all interesting thing. I mean, let's imagine this. Someone is pikuach nefesh, and they're watching television in the hospital, and they ask you to change the channel. Or turn on the TV. Well, is that because it's on Shabbos? Let's say, is that pikuach nefesh?
I'll get a nurse to do that for you.
Yeah.
See if I can find
Yeah, but the truth is, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik was medayek from the Rambam that once a person is in a state of sakana, you do whatever makes him more comfortable, even if it's not directly, medically contributing to the getting him out of the danger, because you never know. A person in a more relaxed state is, going to recover better than someone not in that state. So now, of course, you get a non-Jewish nurse if you can. That's always going to be the case. But if push came to shove, and you were the only person, according to Rav Chaim's understanding of the Rambam, you can actually turn on the television or turn on the stereo or turn on the music for a person that is a chola sheyesh bo sakana. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Well, back to the issues on the road. It's
Yeah.
Late on a Friday,
Yeah.
on the other side of the ocean, not here.
Yeah.
Car disabled on a major artery blocking over traffic.
Well, I will tell you, in many, many cases, that is a pikuach nefesh mamish, that a car is going by high speed. It's not just a question you're causing tircha for other people. I mean, the problem is going to be these cars whiz by and, they'll just smash into you.
But if the traffic's already stopped,
Well, I would just wait for the police will be there shortly. Well, so what are the alternatives here? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can wait for the police and tell the police if it's already dark, I can't drive, and they'll take the car to the side or something like that.
and then you're stuck.
And then you might be stuck. But maybe I know that for the men we have the strings or the straps. I don't know how the women would show. Maybe the shaitel. I don't know, whatever it would be. But you could ask the police to drive you into the community. That you would be allowed to have them do. And hopefully they'll accommodate. I hope. Yeah.
I was a doula, birth coach for
Yeah.
many, many years. And Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz said to me, I asked him about getting back after I'd been in the hospital with the woman.
Right.
And he said, if you go with the staff in their car anyway, they're going around,
Yeah.
but you cannot have him stop for you. You can only get out in the closest place that one of them is.
The drivers were Jewish or not Jewish in your situation? What this is?
I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, okay, it would depend. If it's a non-Jewish situation, you could go home, and again, according to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, you could be dropped off at your house. I mean, that's what he says. Okay, yeah.
Back to your extended life. If
Yeah.
the person is brain dead and not physically dead, are you allowed to do anything?
Brain dead? Oh, okay, this is really takes us far afield. The question is, the din that we're mechalel Shabbos for a person, does that apply even if a person is brain dead? Now again, this itself requires a whole definition because brain dead is not the same as coma. Now, if a person's in a coma, what's called a persistent vegetative state, even if it seems like he'll never come out of the coma, you are 100%, you violate Shabbos for that person. Now, brain dead is beyond that. Brain dead is already a diagnosis that the brain stem is not functioning, and according to some halachic opinions, a brain dead person is halachically dead. A comatose person is not. But a brain dead person might be halachically dead, and those are the opinions that permit organ removal from brain dead people. However, since many poskim do say the person's alive, so at a minimum, we would treat a brain dead person as a safek if he's alive or dead, and as a result, we would violate Shabbos because of the safek. Now, if you would have asked Rabbi Tendler, Zichronu Livracha, Rav Moshe David Tendler, if you could be Mechalel Shabbos for a brain dead person, I assume he would answer no, because his halachic position was that a brain dead person is 100% dead, and if that is the case, you cannot violate the Shabbos for the dead, only for the living. But most poskim treat it at least as a safek, and therefore you'd have to desecrate the Shabbos. But again, I have to emphasize, this really deserves a whole other share on its own. Do not, under any circumstances, confuse the term brain dead with coma. People often describe patients in comas as being brain dead. That is not the case. A person in a coma may lack consciousness and higher mental functioning, but the brain stem is intact. People in comas can often breathe without respirators. They are able to breathe and digest, and their systems are working, even though they lack mental consciousness. A person in a coma is 1,000% halachically alive, and to remove an organ from a person in a coma, which some medical ethicists have proposed, by the way, is an act of murder, and actually, under the present state of secular law, even under secular law, it's an act of murder, and kal v'chomer under halacha. But brain death is beyond that. Brain death is a neurological determination that even the brain stem is not working. There's no capacity of respiration, and the breathing is only done by the machine. So that is a big machlokas, and that's the major machlokas about organ donation. Because organ donation is predicated on brain death, but because of the respirator, the heart is getting oxygen, the heart continues to beat, and then you could remove it. So those who say brain death is death will consider organ donation a mitzvah. Those who consider brain death not death consider organ donation murder. So it's either the biggest aveira or it's the biggest mitzvah, because the whole organ donation industry depends on accepting brain death as your definition of death, as it is in the United States, as it is under the law of Israel as well for many years. Although the Rabbanut goes back and forth, but all the way back in the 1980s, the Rabbanut did allow Hadassah Hospital to do heart transplants based on the halachic acceptance of brain death criteria. But the Rabbanut changes a lot. The Rabbanut goes from Haredi to not Haredi, whatever it is. So I think the later Rabbanuts withdrew their authorization, but I don't know if Hadassah cares or Hadassah is even bound by that. So I honestly don't know. My impression is people who need heart transplants tend to go to Chutz La'aretz. I'm not sure if they do heart transplants in Israel. There wouldn't be enough of a supply anyway, because people aren't giving. But this is the issue. So, but Lagabi Chilul Shabbat, if it's a safek, so b'safek we're Mechal Shabbat. Okay, so this is all the general little pikuach nefesh. So now I'm about where I wanted to start. And we now have the three exceptions. There are three exceptions where a Jew must give his life or her life before they transgress. This is called Yehareg V'yal Ya'avor, to be killed and to not transgress. And these are the famous big three: Avodah Zarah, what is called idol worship; Giloy Arayos, sexual immorality, again we'll define that; and Shvichut Damim, to murder an innocent person to save your life. You must give your life before you become a murderer of the innocent. Now these are the big three that under all and every condition a person must give his life. Now let's go over a few of these parameters. Avodah Zarah is obviously, right? Obviously that's going to be the one that Igeret Hashmad is going to be focusing on. And the Rambam is first going to talk about this generally, and then probably next week we'll talk about how he applied it to Igeret Hashmad. But Avodah Zarah is going to be the focus here. His profession of belief in Mohammed are going to be Avodah Zarah. But the Rambam first addresses it generally. First of all, what's the source of the big three? So each one has its own makor. The source that a Jew must give his life before he rejects God by Avodah Zarah is derived from the Shema. V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. You shall love Hashem b'chol levavecha, with all of your heart, b'chol nafshecha, with all of your soul, b'chol mo'odecha, with all of your might, or all of your money, all of your possessions. But Chazal focus on the middle one. You shall love Hashem with all of your soul, afilu hu notel et nafshecha. That your love of God must be so great that if you're called upon to repudiate the Almighty, your love of God says, I will give my life before I will do that. That's the makor. Afilu hu notel et nafshecha. If you remember, this is exactly what Rabbi Akiva declared as he was being tortured to death with iron hooks or iron combs, flailing his flesh. And his Talmidim said to him, how could this be the reward of such a man who served Hashem as you served Hashem? And Rabbi Akiva said, all of my life I was waiting to fulfill the verse of giving your life for Hashem. And now I have the chance to fulfill giving my life for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's the source for Avodah Zarah. Now the source for Gilui Arayos is a bit more indirect. The Torah in Parshas Kiseitze talks about a betrothed woman, a woman who's married, Nara Hamurasa. She is married, and she's raped. She's attacked by somebody. And it makes an interesting distinction between her being in a city where there are people around and her being in an isolated area. If she's in a city, again, this depends on the facts. This is not an ironclad rule. And theoretically, she could have called for assistance. And she did not. She is equally guilty with the guy because she could have gotten out of it. Again, this is very fact dependent. If, on the other hand, she's in an isolated area, so this is against her will, so the Torah says the rapist certainly gets the death penalty if there was witnesses and the like, but ulanara lo saseh davar. To the young woman you shall not do anything. And it says the following, Ki kasher yakum ish al re'eu ritzacho nefesh, because just as when somebody's the victim of a murder, it's not their fault, they're being victimized, Kain hadavar hazeh, she is like a victim of a murder, right? This rapist is not murdering her, but is doing the equivalent of that. And therefore, she is exempt from a punishment. So it is comparing the rape to a murder. Now, it's doing so in a different context. It's not talking about martyrdom. It's talking about why the victim doesn't get punished. But Chazal use it as a more general rule, and that is, just like in the case of murder, it's clear you're not allowed to murder to save your life, as we'll see. Hu hadin for Gilui Arayos, you're not allowed to do Gilui Arayos to save your life. In other words, the source of Yehareg ve'al Yavor with Gilui Arayos is because it's compared to murder. So we have a source for Avodah Zarah, we have a source for Gilui Arayos, so finally we need the source for murder. Where do we learn you can't murder to save your life? So here we no longer have a pasuk or a drasha. Here we have logic. And the logic is, my chazis, who says your blood is any redder? Meaning like this, I can violate Shabbat to save a life, because saving a life is more important than Shabbos. That's the hierarchy. I can violate kashrus to save a life, because saving a life is more important than kashrus. I can violate Yom Kippur to save a life, because saving life is more important than Yom Kippur. But how can you possibly argue I can murder to save a life? Well, you're taking a life. So who says your life is more important than somebody else's life? Now, what if, I'm pretty sure it is. meaning, what if somebody says to me, kill that derelict drug addict, or I'll kill you or your family? Now, the halacha is very clear. I cannot kill that drug addict because of the svara of my chazes. But wait a second. I don't know. I mean, can't I make an assumption? Or what if, someone says, kill that bum, or I'm going to kill the gadol hador, the tzaddik hador. Again, as difficult as it may be in terms of absolute pure logic, halacha does not allow you to rank whose life is more important, even though you have a pretty good educated guess, but you actually never know. You never know. You never know. So
the person has killed somebody, like a terrorist. What happened?
No. Okay. So obviously, here's the thing. That's why I kept on saying that the principle is you don't kill an innocent person to save your life or to save other people's lives. Even if someone says, kill this person, or I'm going to wipe out your family. Horrendous. You can't do it. Now, you cannot say, well, okay, I'll get to that. I mean, you can't save your family by killing somebody. Now, here's the thing. There are cases where this doesn't apply, and that's the law of rodef. Rodef is you're allowed to kill the one that poses the threat. So, if a terrorist goes over to you and says, kill that Jew or I'll wipe out your family, you are certainly allowed and even commanded to kill the terrorist if you can.
Except he's got the knife. And you...
Yeah, but to kill innocent people to save even other innocent people, you're not allowed because of the svara of my chazes. Now, the Gemara applies this even in numbers. This is the famous case in which a non-Jewish army, in fact, this happened in the Holocaust quite a lot, surrounds a Jewish city and says, give us a Jew to kill, or we will wipe out the whole city. Now here you might think, well, if I give them a Jew, they're killing one person. If I don't give them the Jew, they're going to kill the whole city.
Who say they'll stop with one?
Well, you never know. Okay, but so the halacha is the whole city gets killed, you don't deliver. Now, there's a fascinating machlokes. What if they ask for a specific person? Meaning they don't just say, give us a Jew because we want to make some. They say, give us Avram Goldberg. Now, this is a big machlokes. According to one opinion in the Yerushalmi, if they ask for a specific person, that person becomes like an involuntary rodef. He is the source of endangering the whole community, even though it's not his intention. And as a result, you do deliver him. The Rambam actually paskins under those circumstances, you still don't deliver him. And the whole city gets destroyed. Except halacha is like the Rambam, that you do not deliver the person unless the person is guilty of an actual crime, meaning if the person was guilty of a crime, you are allowed to deliver him. But if he's an innocent person, even if he is specifically requested, you don't do that. And then we get into all sorts of questions. Again, this is a fascinating issue, and I'll probably have to maybe elaborate it next week. But the issue would be shooting down a suicide plane. Let's see how you would analyze this. 9/11 or whatever, right? So you have an airplane that is commandeered by terrorists that is going towards the Pentagon or going towards the World Trade Center. Now, it's a davar pashut ma'od that if the only people on the plane were terrorists, of course you can shoot down the plane and kill the terrorists. The terrorists are rodfim, 1,000%, no problem. But here's the problem. I have 250 innocent or whatever people on the plane. So if I don't allow the plane, if I don't shoot down the plane, let's say 5,000 people are likely to die. If I shoot down the plane, I'm killing 250, but I'm saving 5,000. Am I allowed to kill the 250 in order to save the 5,000? So the truth of the matter is, you normally would not be allowed to, but here there's an additional leniency, and that is the 250 are going to die as part of the 5,000, meaning you couldn't kill 250 who would otherwise live in order to save the 5,000. That's for sure. So that example would be, this is a whole branch of moral philosophy called trolley problems. Because because it was formulated by a Cambridge professor of philosophy, Dr. Philippa Foot, who I think was the daughter or granddaughter of President Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland had a distinction that lasted until the last election. He was the only U.S. president who was elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. And that record stood until Trump. Trump is now the second person who did that. So apparently either his daughter or granddaughter, I don't remember which one, she emigrated to England. She became a very distinguished professor of philosophy, married a guy whose name was Foote. I don't know what he did. And her field was moral philosophy, and she explored the idea of saving some lives at the expense of others. So her trolley situation is, I'm a driver of a tram, of a trolley, and the brakes fail. And if I do nothing, the trolley is going to keep on going, and there are 10 children playing on the track. I'm not going to be able to stop the trolley, but I can turn it onto a side track. But on the side track, there's a worker who fell asleep on the track because it's an abandoned track. Kind of a stupid worker, but huh? Well, again, in the world of moral philosophy, we just make assumptions. We don't tell, these are, they say kasha and maisa. So according to halacha, at least, she goes through utilitarianism and the like, but according to halacha, you would not be allowed to swerve the train in order to hit the one guy, because essentially what you would be doing is you would be killing an innocent guy in order to save 5 that you're not allowed to do. Masha Ein Kain, in the suicide plane, it's a different dynamic. There, even though you're killing 250 to save the 5,000, but the 250 are going to die anyway. It's different than the trolley case where the guy would live. Now, Lamaisa, the Chazon Ish, actually did permit you to swerve, because his argument was, this is not an act of murder, this is an act of rescue. And the murder is only a collateral consequence, because I'm not saving the kids because I'm killing the guy. I'm saving the kids because I got it off the track, meaning if this guy wouldn't be on the track, it would be just as good. It's not like the Goyim saying, kill or we will wipe out the city. I'm doing a Maisa of Hatzalah, you see? So that's a very fascinating Chazon Ish, but the mainstream halachic analysis is the Chazon Ish? Chazon Ish was a good Jew, yeah.
Yes, he should.
Yes, the assumption is
She asked him before she killed him.
No, the assumption is he's Jewish. Yeah, that's the assumption. If he wouldn't be Jewish, although that's not politically correct, the Minchas Chinuch actually says, this is actually one of the most politically incorrect halachos there is, that although you're not allowed to kill a non-Jew generally, but he says you are allowed to kill a non-Jew in order to save the life of a Jew. So according to the Minchas Chinuch l'chol hapachot, we would be allowed to turn on the track. Yeah. Yeah. Say again?
One person is requested by the enemy to save more. So you're not allowed to give up a person.
Yeah.
What if a person volunteers? Is that?
Yes. So we're going to talk about that. Is there such a thing as voluntary martyrdom? Meaning we don't deliver a person to be killed in order to save other people's lives. Can a person volunteer to do so? Think about, for example, the chayal that, or even not a chayal, who jumps on a grenade to prevent other people from being killed. We'll talk about this next week, because that's the whole subject of the notion of, even if halacha says you shouldn't give your life, are you allowed to voluntarily give your life? Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you have one bottle of water in the desert, and there's 2 people and only one, it won't be enough for both of them, then you're supposed to chayecha kodmim.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the same thing or not the same thing.
Well, Chayecha Kodman says you are.
You are killing the other guy, but passively.
Yeah, but that exactly is the difference. So there is a difference between keeping for yourself the instrumentality of rescue versus affirmatively killing. That's exactly the point. We're going to talk more about this again, because what's interesting is, although, just to keep it on focus here, the Rambam's focus is going to be on the Avodah Zarah prong of Yehareg Val Yavor. In modern life, most of the time, the main questions are on the Ritzicha prong, in which when can lives be sacrificed to save other lives. Even in a lot of rescue missions, where you intervene to save lives, that'll often be at the expense of other lives. So even though it's not directly what the Rambam is emphasizing in the Igeres, I think the questions are important enough that we will talk about that as well as continuing the Avodah Zarah discussion, which is the Rambam's primary focus. We also want to talk a little bit about the Gilui Arayos thing, even though doesn't come up in this Igeret, but just to go through the big three. Now, what the Rambam is going to... Yeah.
I just have a question on, I had a question, of living in a town where...
Louder, please.
I'm living in a town where it's, a pogrom is starting.
Pogrom, yeah.
And they're killing Jews. And someone comes into my house and looks at me, and I tell him, I'm not Jewish, I'm a Christian, I believe in Jesus. Is that an issur, or is that smart?
Oh, okay. Well, okay. They're very good. That is actually going to be the major thesis of the Rambam's Igeres Teiman, where the Rambam takes the position that it's smart. There are going to be Balei HaTosfos who take the position that it's forbidden. So we're going to see that's going to be a huge machlokas. Can I say I'm a Christian in order to save my life, or is that treated as a profession of idolatry and be forbidden? That is exactly the main eventual point of the Rambam's psak. But we will talk about that. Okay. I did get a message. I guess it didn't start this week. That classes from now on are going to be. That starts next week.
Obviously, it's not today.
Okay.
Permanently after that.
Permanently, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay.
I read in the paper that the